I should have walked away from him, but something in his eyes told me he needed me more than I needed my next breath. That was the thought running through Clara Hale's mind the day she met the stranger who would turn her quiet countryside life upside down. Clara was the farmer's daughter, the girl everyone in Willow Creek knew for her soft heart, her quick, shy smile, and the gentle way she moved through the world as if she didn't want to disturb even the dust beneath her boots. People always said Clara carried warmth with her, like a lantern glowing quietly in her chest. She smelled faintly of fresh hay from the mornings spent in the barn, warm bread from the afternoons helping her father in the kitchen, and sunshine from the long hours she spent wandering the fields barefoot when the summer wind was kind. She loved her small world, not because it was exciting, but because it was steady. Predictable. Safe. Every morning started with the rooster crowing before dawn, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and her father humming the same country tune he hummed every day since her mother passed. Clara would wrap her hair in a loose braid, slip into her faded overalls, and step out onto the porch that overlooked the land she knew by heart. The dusty barn stood to the left of the house, its boards faded but strong, smelling of hay, soil, and a history that whispered through the cracks. The horses knew her footsteps before she even opened the doors. The cows nudged her affectionately as she moved past them. The old wooden troughs creaked when she filled them. She didn't mind the routine. In fact, she found comfort in it. The barn felt like a diary of her life, each season painted on the walls in fingerprints of dust and memory. Just beyond the barn stretched the golden cornfields, swaying like an ocean of gold under the sun. The stalks rose tall and proud, whispering secrets to one another whenever the breeze passed through. When Clara walked between them, she felt swallowed by their height, yet strangely protected, like the world outside couldn't touch her there. She knew the sound of the wind brushing through the leaves the way some people knew the sound of a loved one's voice. It softened her, grounded her, made her feel like she belonged to something larger, something quiet and good. In the evenings, when the sun began melting into the horizon and painting the sky in soft strokes of lavender and rose, Clara would sit on the creaking front porch beside her father. He would lean back in his old rocking chair with his boots crossed, the radio playing slow, grainy country music from decades ago. Sometimes he'd hum along under his breath, not quite in tune, but Clara always smiled anyway. The porch was where she felt closest to the parts of life she couldn't touch. Her mother's laughter still echoed there in soft, half-remembered pieces. The warmth of childhood summers lingered in the wood, the familiar rhythm of home wrapped around her shoulders like a worn blanket. The porch creaked with every movement, but Clara loved that sound. It reminded her that even old things still had music in them. It reminded her that time could pass and life could change, but something still remained steady, like the porch, like her father, like the fields that never stopped growing, no matter how hard the storms blew. Willow Creek itself was small, just a handful of gravel roads, a diner with peeling red paint, a general store that still had a handwritten sign in the window, and neighbors who knew each other's names, birthdays, and heartbreaks without needing to ask. People waved when they drove by. People slowed their trucks to chat. People cared, even when they didn't have the right words to say it. Clara never imagined wanting anything more than that. Maybe one day she'd travel, maybe not. But for now, her world felt full of earth and quiet mornings, full of familiar voices, full of sunsets that glowed like warm honey. She believed she understood her life. She believed she understood herself. But none of that, none of the steady rhythms, none of the soft routines, none of the small-town predictability, prepared her for the day everything shifted with the sound of a body hitting the ground. It happened so quickly she could barely process it at first, a blur of motion at the edge of the fence line, the distant thud that didn't belong to anything in her usual world. Clara had been walking back toward the porch with a basket of freshly picked vegetables when she froze. Her breath caught, her heart tightened, and a cold ripple traveled across her skin. There, right at the entrance of the farm's gate, lay a man. A stranger. Collapsed as if the earth had pulled him down. Clara blinked hard, wondering if the heat was playing tricks on her eyes. But no, the figure was real. A man with dust on his clothes, sunburn on his skin, and a stillness that terrified her more than anything she'd ever seen. The basket slipped from her hands, vegetables tumbling across the dirt. She didn't even feel her feet move. She just ran. Her heartbeat thudded loudly in her ears, her breath shuddering with each step. The world, which had been so calm only moments before, suddenly tilted. Suddenly felt too sharp, too bright, too fragile. Clara reached the gate and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she touched his shoulder. His skin was warm, too warm, like someone who had wandered too far, too long under the unforgiving sun. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. She didn't know why he had collapsed at her family's gate instead of any other place in Willow Creek. All she knew, deep in her bones, was that in one single moment, her quiet life had cracked open, and nothing would ever be the same again. His name was Rowan. Just the sound of it made Clara's chest tighten, though she couldn't explain why. He was tall, long-limbed and lean, but with a quiet strength that seemed natural, effortless. There was a kind of gravity to him, the way he moved through space like he belonged nowhere yet carried the weight of everything he'd ever known. His skin was sunburned, the deep, uneven bronze of someone who had wandered miles under the scorching sun, the kind of sun that left its mark on both body and soul. But it wasn't the sunburn that caught Clara's attention. It was the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the slump of his shoulders as if the world had been leaning on him for decades. He carried a sadness so heavy, so palpable, it seemed to bend him inward, and yet he held himself with a quiet dignity that made her stomach twist in a strange mixture of fear and fascination. There was mystery in the way he existed in the world, like he'd been moving through life on the edge of something, grief, loss, or guilt, and somehow ended up here, at her family's gate. For the first few moments, he said almost nothing. His voice was a rasp, soft and raw, like a shuttered window finally opening after a storm. "I just need a place to breathe," he whispered. It was almost inaudible, and yet it landed in Clara's ears like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through her chest. The words were simple, but the weight behind them pressed down on her heart. She felt an instinctive pull to him, a sudden, unreasoned desire to help, to shield, to be the one safe thing in a world that had clearly been too hard on him. Clara's hands trembled as she reached out to touch him. Her heartbeat surged in her ears, a frantic rhythm that made her feel alive and terrified all at once. The air between them seemed to hum with tension, an invisible current that neither of them understood but both felt. When she helped him to his feet, her fingers brushed against the warmth of his skin, and she could not stop the shiver that ran up her spine. She hated herself for noticing how solid he felt beneath her hands, the reassuring weight of him that made her pulse race. Every detail seemed magnified, the rough texture of his shirt against her palms, the faint smell of smoke and earth clinging to him, the faint scrape of stubble along his jawline as she leaned closer to steady him. Rowan's eyes were another world entirely. Dark, deep, and unreadable at first glance, they softened when they found her. She remembered them lingering on her face as if she were the first safe thing he had seen in months, or maybe years. There was something almost desperate in that look, something raw and unguarded, like a man who had been holding in a storm of grief finally letting it touch someone else. And yet, even in that vulnerability, there was danger. Something dangerous. Something that made Clara's stomach twist in fear and anticipation all at once. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt it in every fiber of her being, a risk, a spark, a forbidden energy that made it impossible to look away. She noticed the small things too, the way he inhaled sharply when her fingers brushed his arm, the subtle tightening of his jaw when she met his gaze, the way he shifted his weight like he was always ready to disappear if the moment demanded it. He was quiet, yes, but he spoke volumes in his silence, and Clara found herself reading him like a book she wasn't sure she was allowed to open. Every exhale, every blink, every nervous flicker of his eyes told a story of someone who had been broken, battered, and abandoned, yet was still standing. And standing before her. Here. Alive. Her mind raced as she tried to reconcile the contradictions. Rowan was both fragile and commanding, silent yet communicative, closed off yet raw with emotion. She wanted to understand him. She wanted to touch him and heal him, even though she barely knew who he was. The pull she felt was almost unbearable, and she hated herself for it. She hated the way her chest tightened, the way her fingers tingled long after she let go of his arm, the way her pulse insisted on reminding her that she was alive, awake, and dangerously drawn to someone she barely knew. From the very start, there was something undeniably dangerous about the way he looked at her. Not threatening, not violent, but dangerous in a more intimate, terrifying way. It was a look that suggested secrets, past sorrows, and a vulnerability he might never let anyone touch, and yet, somehow, he had let her touch him. Even if only briefly. It was enough. Enough to ignite a fire that Clara could neither name nor control. It was a fire that burned with curiosity, fear, longing, and something that felt dangerously like desire. And in that instant, standing there on the edge of the farm, Clara realized something she could not yet fully articulate: this man would change everything. Somehow. Someday. And whether she was ready or not, she would not be able to walk away. And something even more dangerous about the way she looked back. Clara had never felt a pull like this before, not for anyone. It wasn't just attraction, it was a quiet, insistent tug at the deepest parts of her heart, the parts that didn't often get noticed, even by herself. Every glance she stole at him seemed to carry a weight she couldn't explain, a gravity that made her stomach twist and her pulse stutter. She hated that she felt it, hated how alive it made her feel and how terrified it left her at the same time. There was danger in those eyes, in that silence, in the way he seemed both fragile and untouchable. And yet, every instinct in her body urged her closer. Clara's father, wise in the ways of both people and the land, noticed the quiet desperation in Rowan's posture and the exhaustion that seemed to cling to him like dust. He offered Rowan temporary work on the farm, a place to rest, to eat, to find some semblance of grounding. It wasn't much, just chores, tending to the animals, helping with repairs, but it was enough to anchor the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and somehow disrupted the gentle rhythm of their home. Rowan accepted the work with a quiet nod. He never spoke of where he had been or why he had come, and he rarely spoke at all. He moved through the barn and the fields with a soft, careful precision, as though he didn't want to leave marks on the world, or on anyone else. He fed the chickens methodically, brushed the horses' coats with slow, deliberate strokes, and stacked hay bales with a strength that belied his quiet demeanor. There was an air of mystery about him, a magnetic aura that seemed to draw Clara's attention without effort. Clara felt it, an invisible pull that she could neither name nor resist. Every time he walked past her in the barn, her chest tightened in a way that made her breath catch. She caught herself stealing glances across the open spaces of the farm, her eyes tracing the lines of his broad shoulders, the way his fingers moved deftly over the ropes and tools, the small moments of vulnerability in the way he exhaled, slumping slightly after a long day of work. There were awkward moments too, subtle but electric, like when their hands brushed while carrying a bale of hay or adjusting a fence post. Her skin tingled, a warmth spreading from her fingertips to her chest, and she hated herself for noticing. Rowan's voice was another kind of pull. It was soft, measured, almost cautious. But when he spoke to her, the tone softened, gentle and unguarded in a way it never was for anyone else. He asked about the horses, the chickens, the rhythm of farm life, not because he needed to know, but because he seemed to want an excuse to talk to her. Even the smallest questions were loaded with something more, something that made her pulse accelerate. She found herself waiting for those moments, anticipating the sound of his voice with a nervous excitement she couldn't shake. One warm evening, as the sky burned with shades of orange, pink, and violet and the crickets began their soft chorus, Clara wandered toward the fence line where the fields met the edge of the farm. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers, dry hay, and the fading warmth of the sun. A gentle breeze stirred the corn stalks, carrying their whispers across the open land. And there, framed against the setting sun, sat Rowan. He didn't notice her at first. His head was bowed low, dark hair falling slightly into his eyes, fingers gripping the rough wood of the fence post as if holding on to something that might slip away. Clara's breath caught. There was an ache in the way he sat, an almost tangible weight pressing down on his frame, a grief that seemed too large for anyone to carry alone. The lines of tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, told her that he was fighting something internal, something invisible but devastating. She approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. Her steps were light, careful, so as not to disturb the fragile stillness around him. She knelt a few feet away, uncertain how to break the silence, how to bridge the gap between them without intruding. Her heart thudded loudly, echoing in her ears, as if it were trying to warn her that this moment mattered more than anything she had ever known. Rowan's fingers were white from gripping the post so tightly. Every so often, he would flex them, rub at his palms, like trying to soothe a pain that would not relent. Clara wanted to reach out, to place her hand over his, to let him know he wasn't alone, but something stopped her. It wasn't fear of rejection, it was the overwhelming awareness of how delicate this moment was, how close she felt to something she didn't yet understand, and how terrifying it was to witness someone else's raw, unspoken sorrow. The sky continued to burn overhead, casting golden highlights across his shoulders, illuminating the dust on his clothes, and catching the glint of moisture that clung to his lashes. The crickets' chorus swelled around them, a soundtrack of quiet melancholy and suspended time. Clara's mind raced, trying to find the right words, the right gesture, but her thoughts kept fracturing into a million small pieces of emotion: fear, longing, curiosity, worry. She hated herself for how much she wanted to reach out. Rowan finally looked up, just briefly, his gaze scanning the horizon before meeting hers. In that instant, something shifted in the air, a current of tension and unspoken connection that seemed to pulse between them. Clara felt it like an electric spark. He was broken, yes, and yet there was a gravity in his presence that made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. Something dangerous lingered in that look, something that whispered of possibilities, of vulnerability, of a connection that could change everything. And in that suspended moment, Clara realized that whatever this was, whatever invisible thread had tied him to her, it had already begun to pull. "Rowan, are you okay?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of the corn stalks in the evening breeze. She stepped closer, careful not to startle him, though her own hands trembled slightly. Her chest ached with a strange mixture of fear and concern, and every nerve in her body felt alive, alert, as if even the air around him carried a weight she had to respond to. He inhaled sharply, a sound that made her stomach lurch, and wiped at his face with the back of his hand. There was a trembling in his movements, a fragility that made her chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. Then he forced a smile, brief and uneven, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a long day," he said softly, almost too softly, like he was testing whether anyone would really listen, really see. But Clara wasn't naive. She had grown up watching people wear masks and hide cracks in their smiles, but she could sense the tremor beneath his. She heard the pain, sharp and quiet, layered in the faint rasp of his voice. It tugged at something tender inside her, a deep, protective instinct that made her want to stay, to soothe, to anchor him in some way, even if she didn't know how. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to let him know he wasn't alone, but even the smallest gesture felt monumental in the weight of his quiet suffering. Over the next days, the spark between them grew, quiet, tentative, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't a fire that roared immediately, it was a slow burn, creeping along the edges of their routine, threading itself into the way they moved together. Rowan would help her carry feed buckets through the barn, his hands brushing hers sometimes, lingering just a second too long to feel ordinary. He would fix broken fences beside her, his focus intense, yet every so often his gaze would catch hers, and she'd feel a jolt, electric, unexplainable. He tended to the horses with careful attention, talking softly to them, and sometimes when he spoke to her, his voice softened in a way that made her feel both exposed and cherished. Clara noticed the smallest things, the way his fingers flexed as he lifted hay bales, the faint line of worry that creased his brow when he concentrated, the way his jaw tightened when he smiled without wanting to, the subtle hitch in his breath when their eyes met unexpectedly. Each detail became a little thread weaving between them, a quiet intimacy that neither fully acknowledged but both felt in their bones. The air between them thickened in these moments, heavy with something unspoken, something fragile and electric all at once. Her heart began to betray her. Every time he approached, every time their hands brushed accidentally while carrying tools or feeding the animals, her pulse leapt. The rhythm in her chest became uneven, insistent, as if it were warning her that these interactions were no longer safe, they were intoxicating. She hated herself a little for it, hated how alive she felt, hated how vulnerable she became in his presence. And yet, she couldn't pull away. She found herself lingering near him, seeking excuses to be close, to hear the quiet timbre of his voice, to see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. Rowan, too, seemed affected in ways he tried to disguise. Sometimes she caught him exhaling sharply when their hands touched, or straightening quickly as if trying to collect himself after a moment of weakness. There were moments when he would linger at the fence line longer than necessary, or tilt his head to meet her gaze with a softness that made her pulse race. She wondered, fleetingly, if he even realized the tension that hummed between them, the delicate charge that made every ordinary task feel weighted with significance. Even the mundane became charged with meaning. A simple trip to gather eggs could feel intimate, a fleeting glance across the barn row could make her stomach flutter. Clara found herself remembering the precise way he held the wheelbarrow, the tilt of his shoulders in the evening sun, the way the strands of hair fell across his forehead when he bent to tie a knot. She noticed it all, cataloging each detail silently, as if these small observations were tiny threads connecting their hearts in ways neither dared to name. There were awkward moments too. The slight brush of their hands, the accidental step too close in narrow barn aisles, the shared glances that neither could immediately meet, each one left her breathless, a mixture of excitement and fear pooling deep in her chest. She would catch herself staring, caught in the orbit of him, imagining what it would be like if this closeness weren't restrained by circumstance, by hesitation, by unspoken rules neither had dared to break. And through it all, Rowan remained an enigma. He was careful, controlled, yet each small slip, the hitch in his breath, the softening of his voice, the way his eyes lingered, betrayed him. Clara felt the invisible tether tighten, drawing them together despite themselves. She hated how much she wanted to lean into it, hated the way her heartbeat picked up at his mere presence, hated how helplessly aware she was of the connection blooming between them. The days passed like this, a slow, electric dance. Every mundane task, every fleeting touch, every stolen glance became a spark, a signal, a warning. Neither spoke openly of what simmered beneath the surface, and yet the truth was undeniable. Their hearts were speaking in ways their lips had not, whispering secrets in glances and movements, in silent laughter, in small moments that felt monumental. And Clara, standing there in the barn, watching him straighten the fence posts or lift hay bales, realized something she couldn't fully admit even to herself. The spark was no longer just between them, it was inside her, a fire that was growing, quietly, inexorably, and it would not be ignored. She tried to ignore the whisper inside her, why him? Why now? Why do I care so much? But then came the complication. Her father didn't trust Rowan. He saw the shadows in the young man's eyes and warned Clara to keep her distance. People don't run without reasons, he muttered. And reasons have a way of catching up. Clara promised she understood. She nodded when her father gave his warning, when he said Rowan was a man with shadows in his past, a man whose presence could stir something unexpected. She promised she would tread carefully, that she would keep herself contained, that she would not let curiosity or sympathy turn into something dangerous. She meant it. At least, she thought she did. But promises don't control emotions. They can't govern the small, insistent tug in the chest when someone brushes past you, or the quickening pulse when their gaze lingers longer than it should, or the ache that blooms in your stomach when you realize that you care far more than logic would allow. Especially the forbidden ones. The ones that hum under the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite them. Clara had thought she understood restraint, until Rowan's presence made it impossible. It was one of those long summer evenings when the sun clung stubbornly to the horizon, painting everything in molten gold. The fields were heavy with the scent of sun-baked hay, corn stalks swayed lazily, and the faint chorus of crickets filled the air with a soft rhythm. Clara had spent the day working alongside Rowan, stacking hay, mending fences, and moving feed buckets, her back sore but her heart restless. Every glance from him, every quiet word, every accidental brush of his hand had stirred something inside her she wasn't ready to name. At the end of the day, she had carried a plate of freshly cooked food into the barn, balancing the warm meal carefully on her palms. Rowan looked up from where he was stacking bales of hay, exhaustion etched in the lines of his face, a faint shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you," he said, voice low and roughened by the day's labor. "I appreciate it." Clara's pulse quickened. She turned to leave the barn, silently reminding herself that she should step back, that she should walk away before anything delicate, anything fragile, could unravel. She should have left. She should have let the moment dissolve into the routine of chores and evening quiet. But her feet didn't move fast enough. Before she could disappear, Rowan reached out. His hand closed gently around her wrist. There was a softness in his grip, tentative, unsure, hopeful, and it sent a shiver racing up her arm. She froze, breath catching in her throat, the warmth of his skin a dangerous contrast to the chill that had settled in her chest. His eyes, those dark, searching eyes, held hers, unflinching, and suddenly everything else, the barn, the fields, the dying light, seemed to fall away. "Clara, why are you so kind to me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, yet resonant, weighted with curiosity, uncertainty, and something else, something that made her stomach tighten in a mix of fear and longing. Her breath froze. She could feel the warmth of his fingers against her skin, the pulse beneath them, the quiet strength, the careful hesitation, all of it searing a line of awareness straight through her. She wanted to pull back. She wanted to retreat into the safety of distance and reason. And yet, she couldn't. "I don't know," she whispered finally, her own voice trembling just slightly, betraying more than her words did. "Maybe because you look like someone who's forgotten what kindness feels like." Her words hung between them, fragile, luminous, carrying the weight of something neither dared say aloud before. Their eyes locked in a way that made time still. For a moment, the world held its breath. The breeze seemed to pause mid-strum, the crickets fell silent, the warm dust in the barn hung motionless in the golden slant of sunset. Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly, heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the tension coiling in the space between them. Rowan's grip faltered, his hand trembling imperceptibly as he released her wrist abruptly. Guilt flashed across his face, a shadow moving over features that had only moments ago seemed so raw and open. He stepped back slightly, the weight of invisible chains pulling him away from her, away from the moment they almost crossed, almost touched something dangerous and real. "I can't, you don't understand," he said, voice strained, almost breaking under the weight of unspoken emotion. There was desperation in his tone, a quiet torment that made her chest ache. His eyes, dark and vulnerable, flickered away from hers, as if the world had grown too sharp, too honest, and he could no longer bear to meet it. Clara's own hands itched to reach for him again, to draw him back, to whisper that she did understand, that she saw him, truly saw him, in ways no one else ever could. But she stayed still, caught between longing and fear, between the ache of attraction and the caution that logic demanded. She could feel the tension between them, thick and tangible, like the heat of the sun lingering on the barn walls, like the scent of hay and sweat in summer mixing into something sharp and unforgettable. And for a heartbeat, maybe two, the space between them seemed suspended in possibility. Everything Clara thought she knew about herself, about restraint, about safety, seemed to crumble under the weight of Rowan's gaze, the warmth of his hand, the fragile honesty of her own whispered words. She realized, with a startling clarity, that this was only the beginning, not of a simple connection, but of something that would challenge every promise, every boundary, every quiet certainty she had ever held. He walked away before she could answer, each step carrying the weight of unspoken words and fractured longing. The sudden distance left her breathless, her heart hammering in a rhythm that made the barn feel impossibly quiet, impossibly empty. She had wanted to reach out, to say anything, anything to bridge the space he had put between them, but he was gone, slipping through her fingers like the fading light of sunset. That was the beginning of their deepening, a slow, quiet unraveling that neither of them could resist, even as they tried. Days turned into evenings filled with stolen moments, tiny fragments of connection that grew heavier with meaning. Nights by the barn became their refuge, where the world outside didn't exist. They would sit beneath the dim glow of lantern light, sharing stories that hovered on the edge of confession, their voices soft and low. Clara listened as Rowan spoke in fragments, his words halting but honest, each one revealing the edges of the man behind the carefully constructed calm. She laughed at the small jokes he attempted, the awkward humor he tried to hide behind his serious demeanor, and felt a thrill every time their hands brushed across the hay-strewn floor. Laughing by the river became another quiet ritual. They would wander through the tall grass, the water whispering along its banks, sunlight glinting on ripples as it passed. Clara would watch him skip stones across the surface, or try and fail to balance on the slippery rocks, and she felt a lightness she hadn't known she could feel with anyone. Rowan's laughter, rare, sharp, and honest, rippled through the air, and each sound struck her chest in an almost unbearable way. She wanted to memorize it, bottle it up, carry it with her always. And he seemed to notice her watching, those fleeting moments when his eyes found hers, and the tension between them surged without a word being exchanged. Rowan did small, careful things that made her heart jump like it might burst. He fixed her old radio just to see her smile, adjusting wires and fuses with a precision that betrayed his quiet intelligence and hidden care. She had brought it in with a sigh, half expecting it to be beyond repair, but he crouched there beside her, hands gentle, expression focused, and when the music crackled back to life, her face had lit up with that radiant smile he couldn't stop himself from noticing. Her joy seemed to wrap around him, loosen the tight edges of his shoulders, and for a moment, he let himself believe he could belong here, with her. And Clara, day by day, realized she cared too much. It wasn't subtle, it was a slow, creeping awareness that hit her in quiet moments. When she felt the absence of him, even briefly, her chest ached as though a piece of her had wandered away. She hated how deep it went, how fully it consumed her thoughts. Every glance, every fleeting touch, every shared laugh became a tether she couldn't escape. Rowan fought at every step. He tried to mask the intensity in his gaze, to retreat behind quiet gestures and stoic expressions. He moved with restraint, keeping just enough distance to protect them both, or perhaps just himself, from something he refused to confront. And yet, in the cracks of his armor, Clara could see the conflict, the longing, the guilt, and the unspoken yearning that made her pulse race every time they were near each other. But the twist came without warning, sudden and sharp as lightning splitting the sky. One stormy afternoon, when the rain lashed the windows and thunder rattled the walls, her father barged into the house, his face pale with urgency and his hands gripping a torn piece of newspaper. The words on his lips carried weight and disbelief. Clara's breath hitched as she saw the familiar face on the page, Rowan's face, captured in black and white, eyes haunted, expression tense. "He's wanted," her father growled, voice tight with disbelief and anger. Not for crime, but for disappearing. His fiancée died in a car accident. He walked out of his life and never came back. His family's been searching for months. The paper trembled in his hands, the words jumping at her eyes like sparks. Clara felt her stomach drop. Her chest tightened, and she stumbled back a step, the room spinning slightly as the rain hammered against the roof. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the story unfolding before her. She had felt the shadow in his eyes, the weight in his voice, the grief he carried silently, but she had never imagined the depth of it, the reason for the pain that lingered in every hesitant smile, every quiet glance. So that was the shadow behind his eyes. Every hesitation, every moment of restraint, every flicker of pain she had witnessed now had a name, a shape, a history. He wasn't running from her. He was running from a past that still gripped him, a wound that hadn't yet healed, a loss that had reshaped the contours of his soul. The barn, the river, the fields, they all seemed suddenly smaller, quieter, weighted with the knowledge of secrets too heavy for one person to carry. Clara's mind replayed every stolen glance, every subtle brush of fingers, every moment of laughter and quiet intimacy, and the ache of it all pressed into her chest. She realized how fragile their connection was, how delicate, and how much it mattered. Rowan's presence, once a source of warmth and curiosity, now carried an invisible tension, a sense of impending reckoning. Clara felt both fear and a strange, unbidden relief at understanding, fear at the truth, and an ache for what could never be fully known yet. The world had shifted in a single instant, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside her heart. And in that moment, she understood something fundamental, the man she had come to care for so deeply carried a weight that would change everything. Not just for him, but for her, too. That night, she confronted Rowan outside the barn. Rain poured around them. Thunder rolled. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked. Rowan's jaw clenched. "Because you'd look at me like I'm broken." "You're not broken," she whispered. He shook his head. "Clara, I can't give you anything. I'm still buried in a past I don't know how to leave behind." And then he said the words that shattered her. "You deserve someone whole. Someone who isn't using your kindness to feel alive again." Clara stepped back like she'd been slapped. Rowan walked away that night. No goodbye. No explanation. just vanished the same way he arrived. That was the breakdown. Weeks passed. Clara's smile faded. Her father tried to comfort her, but she wasn't grieving Rowan leaving. She was grieving the version of herself she'd become with him, braver, softer, more honest. So she started healing. Slowly. More walks by the river. More time with the horses. More conversations with herself. Why did I fall for someone who wasn't ready to love me back? But the truth became clear. Because sometimes people cross paths not to stay, but to help you meet the version of yourself you've been too afraid to become. Then, one cool evening, the crunch of footsteps echoed across the yard. Clara turned. There he was. Rowan. Cleaner, calmer, holding a small duffel bag. His eyes found hers instantly. I went home, he said softly. Told my family the truth. Faced everything I ran from. Clara swallowed. Why come back? Rowan stepped closer, the space between them shrinking with each careful movement. The wind, which had been stirring the cornfields and tossing stray strands of hay, seemed to pause, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Clara could feel it in the small hairs on her arms, the quickened rhythm of her heartbeat, the subtle pull in her chest that made her body ache in anticipation. His voice trembled, raw and vulnerable, carrying the weight of weeks, months, perhaps years of silence. Because healing didn't feel real until I realized what I left here, he said, each word deliberate, heavy with meaning. You weren't a distraction, Clara. You were the one thing that made me want to be alive again. The sound of it, his honesty, fragile yet strong, struck her like a quiet storm. The wind stilled completely, leaving only the soft hum of the fading day, the distant murmur of the river, and the rustle of corn leaves brushing against one another. But her heart didn't still. It beat fast, erratic, insistent, as though it had been waiting all this time for the permission to feel. Every muscle, every nerve, every pulse in her body seemed attuned to him, vibrating with a mix of relief, fear, and longing. Rowan's gaze softened as he searched her eyes, as though looking for a sign, a single flicker that she felt the same way. And when he leaned just a little closer, the words that followed were almost a whisper, barely audible over the hush of evening, yet they cut through her completely. If you'll have me. I want to try. Really try. Clara's breath hitched, caught somewhere between disbelief and overwhelming joy. Her chest tightened, and for a heartbeat, she felt as though the weight she had carried for so long, the ache, the uncertainty, the tension of unspoken desires, finally loosened, like a cord finally snapping free from a stubborn knot. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instantaneous relief. But it was real, tangible, and it was theirs. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, catching the golden light of the sunset as it poured through the barn doors, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air. She felt every nerve alight, every emotion magnified. The ache she had carried, that small, persistent knot of fear and longing in her chest, finally gave way to something softer, warmer, and undeniably present. She stepped into him, into the space he offered, the safety he didn't even know he was providing. Not because he needed saving, he never did, but because she finally understood something vital. She didn't need permission to follow her own heart. The choice, the courage, the surrender, was entirely hers. And for the first time, she embraced it fully. Their arms wrapped around each other with a tentative certainty, slow at first, testing, learning, but then with more conviction. The fading sunset painted everything in amber and rose, bathing them in a light that felt sacred, intimate, and fleeting. The warmth of his body, the steady heartbeat against hers, the soft exhale that mingled with her own, all of it became a language without words, an unspoken promise stitched into the very air around them. The embrace felt like the beginning of a new season. Not perfect, because life rarely is. Not easy, because every step forward carried the echoes of past pain, lost time, and the vulnerability of two hearts daring to trust again. But honest. Healing. Real. And that reality, messy, beautiful, trembling, was enough. Clara felt the tension in her shoulders finally release, her breath coming in soft, steadying waves. She leaned her forehead against his, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his hands on her back. Every moment, every second, whispered that this wasn't about rescue, or obligation, or fear. This was about two people, standing in the fragile quiet of evening, choosing to let themselves be seen and to risk everything for connection. The golden light deepened into dusk, shadows stretching long across the fields, and the first stars appeared timidly in the sky above. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude, wonder, and the lingering thrill of having taken a leap into the unknown, guided not by certainty, but by trust and desire. And as Clara's voice closes this chapter of their story, as the barn doors creak softly in the settling night and the wind carries the faint scent of hay and summer rain, one question lingers in the air for everyone listening. If someone walked into your life needing healing, would you let your heart take the risk? Would you step forward, even when the path is uncertain, even when the stakes are high, even when it feels forbidden or impossible? Because sometimes, the only way to find the heart you've been waiting for, both theirs and your own, is to let go of fear, lean into vulnerability, and trust that love, even fractured, even hesitant, is worth the risk.